You are listening to Unscripted Moments, a podcast about propaganda. On this episode, we are discussing Letters to a Young Anus, track 5 on 2017's Victory Lap LP. This is our 9th episode from a Victory Lap song, so it feels good to be kind of moving through these a little bit. And today, I'm thrilled to have a guest host holding down the fort with me, Josh Lindley, co-host of Last Believer, a podcast about good riddance. Thank you so much for joining me. Josh, say hi and introduce yourself a little bit to the listeners out there.
Hi, Greg. Thanks for having me. Anyone that hasn't yet, please go back and listen to the last time I was on this podcast. Greg was nice enough to have me come on here and talk about the Today's Empire, Tomorrow's Ashes, Rager, Ordinary People Do Fucked Up Things When Fucked Up Things Become Ordinary. I'm sure Greg has the episode number probably in his head somewhere.
Actually, I can't remember. It was somewhere in the 60s. Ago. Yeah, somewhere in the 60s.
Yeah, let's say that. But yeah, that should give more of an idea of who I am and why I care so much about propaganda. But the short version of it is that for the last year and a half, me and my pal Dan Forcier have recorded a podcast about Santa Cruz hardcore punk band Good Riddance, where we talked about 3 songs per episode in a mostly surface level and emotionally driven way, especially compared to Unscripted Moments. I also run a website and a company called Bartender Atlas with my wife, and it's an online directory of bartenders throughout the world, all over. Yeah, so we built that to showcase the idea that not all great things, drinks in that case, need to come from major metropolitan centers, sort of the same way that you might not expect one of the most impactful, aggressive music groups of the last 30 years to call Winnipeg home. Indeed. Anyhow, super excited, flattered to be a co-host for this episode that you and Keith are experimenting with your open pod relationship.
Indeed, we are. We now have an open pod relationship. This is a non-monogamous podcast at this moment in time. So shout out to Keith, who is off doing some ultra important stuff in his life right now. But, Josh, I was thinking, you've done a Song Exploder discography wide podcast yourself. And I mean, do you have any thoughts on reflecting on going back through that process? I'm just curious about your thoughts on that. Now that you have finished essentially, tell me a little bit about that process going back before we launch into our tune.
Yeah, sure. It's a interesting thing to do when something that you consider has been part of your life, in the case of Good Riddance for, 25 to 27 years of my life, I've been listening to this thing, and to actually not have it be the thing playing in the background or while you're skateboarding, or, you focus really hard on it for 45 minutes or an hour of a night when you're going to see a band play, but having it be a weekly dive into why it means so much. It's a funny thing, obviously the last 2 years, everyone has had a little extra time for self-reflection. And I think that ties into what this song that we're talking about this week is about as well. So it's been cool to dive back in and figure out what something meant to you then, what something means to you now, and then trying to trace your steps along the way of how you got to where you're at.
Yeah. I mean, I totally agree. I say on this podcast all the time that whenever I was 20, I was listening to this propaganda song and I loved it. And I really had no idea what it meant. And so now I'm finding myself being let's dive a little more deeply into it. And I just find it to be such a useful mental exercise to kind of keep the brain going. When you get older, stagnation starts to set in. And this is one of my stagnation deflection tactics. You know what I mean?
Calling a podcast a stagnation deflection tactic is maybe a better name for what a podcast is than podcast.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so Josh, you mentioned that you were here last to talk about a song from Today's Empire, Tomorrow's Ashes. Now you're here to talk about a song from Victory Lap. I'm wondering if you can just tell me a little bit about, what this record means to you as a whole before we dive a little deeper.
Yeah, for sure. So I think something, and you guys, obviously, this is what you do, is talk about the band. Something that comes out about Victory Lap a lot is that it truly, to me, sounds like a summation of what propaganda has built. There are parts on Victory Lap that, I mean, obviously not production wise, but and musicianship wise even, but could fit on every previous propaganda record. There are parts that, and it's funny to sort of draw lines between different propaganda records and what could have fit on this record and what could have fit on this record. And I think with Victory Lap, you really have almost like a mixtape of what propaganda can and has done. It's catchy and cute at times. It's heavy and crushing and tearing at your soul at different times. The difference between a song like Cop Just Out of Frame, where it's like a top 5 propaganda song for sure. Whether it's a favorite or not, listening to it, you understand that it is objectively one of the best songs they've ever done.
I agree. And it's our most downloaded episode of all time. I just have to say that.
I'm not surprised by that at all. And I think it's funny to have whatever 29, 35 years into a band existing, them writing a song that sounds so much like them, but also knowing the growth that they've gone through to get there. Not the song that we're talking about today. Today, I feel is a song that would probably fit really well on Less Talk More Rock or How to Clean Everything, just based on the structure and the musician, like the way the music is written for it. So I think it's really cool to be able to encompass all of that into one album, which was Victory Lap.
So one more question before we actually talk about the song. You and I have actually gotten to hang out since last time you were on the podcast. I came up to Toronto for one of the shows at Lee's, and you and I got to spend a substantial amount of time together, which was lovely. And we got to go to Sneaky D's in Toronto, which was also lovely. And so, tell me a little bit about that show week where Propaganda was in Toronto for that May 2022 tour, because I had a blast on that week.
Yeah, so it was very funny for me that those two shows, months and months and months ago when tickets went on sale, I bought tickets for the first show and the first show only. And I did that because I truly feel that everyone should see Propaganda.
Yeah.
They are too good to have someone not see it. And I was positive both those shows would sell out. And so I wasn't going to buy tickets to both shows because I didn't want to be that guy. I want to make sure that as many people get to see Propaganda as possible. So I bought tickets to the first show. And the first show of the 2 nights that they played at Lee's Palace in a row, the first show, I think it was 60% Victory Lap songs that they played on the night of the 24th. Setlist.fm will have it up there. But yeah, most of the show was Victory Lap songs, which again, no issues here. Love Victory Lap. Everything was amazing. Whereas the second night, which was the day you and I went to Sneaks, and then I didn't think I was going to the show. I had gone home. I was relaxing and I got a text from a friend saying, hey, I have an extra ticket. So I ended up going to the second night as well.
Yeah.
And without exaggerating, like with maybe 2 swap outs, I think it was the best set Propaganda could have put together. Like set list wise, the song choice that night was just bonkers. It was like, if I had to choose 15 songs to show someone what Propaganda is, those are the 15 songs I would have chosen.
I mean, and it was Potemkin City Limits, Anti-Manifesto, the live debut of Tartuffe on that second night. So, I mean, you really did see a special one, because I was sitting there like, I can't believe how good this is tonight. This is perfect.
Yeah. One song that they didn't play on either of those nights was Letters to a Young Anus. And Greg, someone did a cover of this song for you.
Absolutely. Yes. So getting down to the business at hand here, for this episode, we have a cover of Letters to a Young Anus performed by some friends of the podcast. So ages ago, I befriended somebody named Dylan James, who lives in Winnipeg. He was the guest on our funeral procession episode. And Dylan plays drums in a couple bands in Winnipeg, and he plays in a band called Clipwing with Randy Frickus as well. Randy is the director of the Failed Imagineer video, interestingly. So Dylan has a online music project that he does with friends called the Isolation Booth. It's a YouTube music project spearheaded by Dylan and a couple of his buddies. So Dylan plays drums, and he is like, after he and I became friends, he's like, oh yeah, by the way, we have a couple songs on YouTube where we played Propaganda songs. And I was like, oh my gosh. So I went and watched, and they did Call Before You Dig, which was fabulous. And then they also did Letters to a Young Anus, which I thought was incredibly random, but it is so good. So Dylan sent in a voicemail, and his friend Kyle sent in a copy of the tune. So Dylan's going to introduce the tune, and then we'll hear the cover. So this is the Isolation Booth performing Letters to a Young Anus.
Hey everybody, this is Dylan James from Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada, and you are about to listen to a cover of Letters to a Young Anus by Propaganda. This cover includes myself on drums, my friend Marty on guitar, my other friend Kyle on guitar, and we have a couple friends from across the pond that joined us. We have Rufy on vocals and our friend Walter on bass. Both those guys Rufy is from Switzerland and Walter is from Austria. And we love those guys. We're so happy how this cover turned out. You can view this cover on YouTube as well under the Isolation booth. And we picked this song just because it rips. Simple as that. This song rips. Propagandy rips. We love Propagandy so much. And shout out to Unscripted Moments, Keith and Greg, for all that they do on this podcast and all the hard work they put into it. Thank you for listening. And we love you, and stay safe, and we'll talk to you later. Thanks for listening.
Be careful how much you reveal. Yeah, the one piece of advice for your kid. Keep your mouth shut, put a fucking lid upon your dissenting views. Don't arise with the free stuff like it's just a goddamn thing. Oh, they carry on back. Hold your tongue before you reflex the gap. There's nothing you can do. Do not allow when they vote and be fair. And that's all surprise when they serve in a straight. Water is poison, they play how are we? Not all little legs to rearrange the deck. Down dead for now. Down dead for now. Like jump right now. If I were you, everything you say can and will be used against you when done as until with a glass through your head with a masonry drill. It's all downhill for you. It doesn't matter what you think. It doesn't matter how you feel. It don't matter that you can sleep. Be careful how much you reveal. Ex-Navy, I told you so. Suppress your overwhelming urge to will you can save all the shit for your suicide. No trouble wording your last laugh. I lend you my final draft. Be careful how much you reveal.
Okay, so thank you to Dylan, Marty, Kyle, Walter, and Rufy for that fabulous cover. So Josh, we're going to kind of break this down musically, and I'm really curious to hear some of your thoughts on the musical performance in general. So I know you have some thoughts on the guitar performance, the bass, the drums, maybe the vocal delivery. Let's start with guitars. What do you like about the guitars on Letters to a Young Anus?
All right. I think this intro, it's, I guess you could call it kind of light as far as Propagandy is concerned. It reminds me of some of my favorite songs from today's Empires, like Ladies' Night in Loserville or Mata Camoras. It all kind of starts with sort of leading you in. And then with those two songs, the same thing, you get lulled into this sense of mellow anticipation. And on Letters to a Young Anus, it's almost more impactful because by the time Victory Lap came out, having a mid-tempo or even a slow Propagandy song wasn't so much of a shock as it would have been on today's Empires or Potemkin City Limits. I guess by the time Potemkin came out, it really sort of blew the idea of, what Propagandy sounds like, sort of got blown out and they could sound like anything at that point.
Anything.
It's really just expanded the sound so much. Anyway, that said, on this song, this kind of eerie intro pretty quickly jumps into one of the most capital P punk sounding riffs that Propagandy has had in a while.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's really straightforward and in your face.
Yeah, for sure. It's fast and it's precise and not noodly at all. I mean, there's little runs here and there, but the bridge part especially, I think, is really cool. I have no idea what to call that tone or style of playing. Not a musician, definitely not a guitarist, but it definitely breaks the song up in a way that emphasizes both the bridge part and the verse part that they go back into. It's almost like they sound like they mean more. Again, definitely emotionally based, talking about music here, nothing technical at all. Yeah, of course, there's cool lead parts, and the lead part that mirrors at the beginning and the end of the song, I think, is a really cool, songwriting tactic. But as Propaganda goes, this one is, simple, especially compared to Tartu for Potemkin City Limits or whatever.
Right. Yeah. Something that really does capture me is the simplicity of that. And I'm like, this feels almost like I cringe to say this, but it almost kind of like feels bizarre to say, but it kind of reminds me of something on like Full Circle by Pennywise, that, So the first thing to note is that there's this really great playthrough video by a guy that we cite all the time, Clem, who has a YouTube channel called Last Note. And so he's got his capo on the 4th fret, so you can watch him play it there. And I went back and I watched the band play this live in Australia in 2019, and they have capos on the 4th fret as well on their guitars. So that's something to consider. And the verses of this is an interesting tune, because some parts of the guitar I really love in this song, and some parts of the guitars and the vocal melody just don't land for me. Like that it just kind of doesn't really like land for me as far as like the vast spectrum of performances the Propaganda has done. And the obviously the song is extremely well played, which is just an obvious thing for this band because it's all well played, but the guitar riff under the verses have just never really clicked with me since this record came out. And maybe it would help if I saw it live, but I've never seen them play this song live. Right. Seeing something live really helps me connect with something in a way, which is why I like Victory Lap so much more now, because I've seen them play 9 of the 12 songs live. So for me, the magic in this song on the guitar is the little transition sections in the guitar, the riff that repeats a few times, that and then into the outro where they kind of get that those blast beats going on the drums. It kind of reminds me a tiny bit of the outro on Rattan Cane with that super heavy outro. And I like the guitar solo too, but like it's just the verse that doesn't really connect with me very much. But by far, my favorite part of this song, guitar-wise, is the last 30 seconds, from where the guitar solo comes in through those final blast beat sections. So that's my favorite parts. But my favorite bass run line, I don't know if you have any thoughts on the bass performance, but my favorite bass run line is under that "damned if we do, damned if we don't" line, because Todd just has something that sounds really awesome that kind of connects the band going back into the next section of the song. So do you have any thoughts on the bass in particular?
I feel like Chris showed up to rehearsal one day and was like, guys, I have this song. Chris played it through and Todd heard it and was like, yeah, man, we're just going to fucking rip.
Yeah.
And I think that is like, that's why I like this song so much, is because you have a band that can be so studied and precise on everything. Yeah. But then sometimes you write a riff that just fucking rips. So just let it rip. You know?
And I think that they said in interviews before that, they took songwriting on this album a different approach than they used to, because I know that Chris had super young kids at home and he was just kind of running around a lot. So I think that they took a little bit different of an approach. And they also seem like the kind of band where they demo material so thoroughly with so many different versions that they probably almost drive themselves insane with like how much that they rework things. That's kind of the impression that I get from how they work. So maybe this was one where they're kind of like, I'm kind of hoping this is a song that just kind of fell into place quickly and wasn't super stressful, you know?
Yeah, for sure. I think that too. I know you sort of mentioned the drum part as well, the blast beats there, but I feel like that, I mentioned how Todd was probably just like, let's just let it rip, because the bass line does sort of follow whatever Chris is doing. But I sort of feel the same way about the drums as I do about the bass. Of course, you guys have talked about this enough times. Jord is capable of making really tough stuff sound very easy. Yeah. And so in a song that's maybe more straightforward than, say, Tartu for Potemkin City Limits or whatever, he still manages to play drum parts that are super impressive. The whole thing that he does where he follows guitar leads with cymbal and tom rolls, it's always super impressive. And then again, under the damned if we don't part, where he plays, I don't know, for what, 1.5 bars, like it's not even a straight measure forward, like barely 2 bars. He plays that tom bass beat and then jumps back into the beat that we already are used to, and the bridge part, especially where he's just smashing through his kit, but somehow it still sounds tasteful without being overplayed or overblown.
Yeah. Well, in the playthrough video of the Isolation Booth, the cover that you heard, they have a playthrough video where they're all on the screen in different little, camera boxes, little frame boxes on the video. You can see Dylan, how he goes through it, and it's awesome. The drums are so good on this, and Dylan really has a nicely demonstrated full playthrough video where you can see him play the entire thing, and you can see how much more is going on than just straightforward like pop, 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 pop. So there's just a lot going on there for the drums. But I tell you what, the verses vocal delivery also doesn't really click with me all that much. But listening to the cover that we included at the start of the episode kind of helped me reimagine the song a little bit. And, bands over time, they kind of rework their material live in ways that, songs are organic things, that a song on a record doesn't have to be the finished version of it. Just because it's on a record doesn't mean you can't edit or change it in the future when you perform it. So seeing those added little vocal melody, subtle flares that Rufy does in that cover made me like the song a lot more, because those are like vocal modulations that I wish were in the original, because it makes it more memorable and more hooky to listen to. But the cover enhanced the vocal melody for me and helped me rethink the way that some of the things in the song that weren't landing for me. Then it kind of helped me like rethink and reimagine to be like, hey, this is actually a really cool little subtle vocal flare that kind of takes it to the next level for me. So I kind of want to be like, hey, I wish the band should like check this out, because this is so good. Because I love it when bands who do covers kind of add a little flair to it to make it their own. Because it just shows that songs can be these like living, breathing things that grow in scope over time, depending on who puts their little subtle touches on it. You know what I'm saying?
Do we know if Clipwing or the Isolation Booth have ever crossed paths with Propagandy? Do we know as a definitive, like, they know each other or played shows together or whatever?
Oh yeah, for sure. Clipwing and Propagandy definitely have a relationship of some kind, because Randy, the guitar player in Clipwing, directed the video. Yes, directed the Failed Imagineer video. So Randy from Clipwing is the only music video like filmer or like director that Propagandy's ever had. And I know that they all played hockey together as well. So there's definitely some kind of relationship there too, which is really cool.
So there is a serious likelihood that Chris would hear this other vocal delivery.
Maybe. So they did a good job on it. I really like it. And so thanks again to Kyle, Dylan, and Marty for sending over that cover and for making it, because like when you think about Letters to a Young Anus, it's not one that like would immediately jump out as being something, hey, we should cover this one, because it's clearly like I don't hear people talk about this song. People have never asked for a Letters to a Young Anus podcast episode by us. Like people have been like, when are you guys doing Highly Celeste? When are you guys doing Oka Everywhere? Like, when are you doing Coach's Corner? Like there have been so many songs that we've gotten a million requests for. Not a single person has ever said, I can't wait for the Letters to a Young Anus episode. So I'm not saying this song isn't awesome, because obviously I love everything pretty much about this band, but this is not one that would immediately jump into everybody's like, top tier, it feels like. But the fact that the Isolation Booth put so much work into that cover makes me really happy, because it was like a very pleasant surprise that it existed,
Yeah, for sure. As far as the vocals are concerned for me and this track, at the end of the song, there's a very forceful which, although I think you and I talked about this the last time I was on the show too, nothing is going to compare to the Yes and supporting cast. But like when Chris has his they're like instantly like, I'm in. I'm game.
Dude. Yeah, Victory Lap is the definitive record for Propagandy. They are all over this record, and it's just wonderful. So I'm glad that you're appreciative of the as well, because they're all over this one.
Oh, yeah, of course. As for the rest of the song, the rapid fire delivery of the vocals doesn't leave a whole lot of space for some of the areas that we know that Chris can push his voice to. And I mean, I think the big leap for that, too, was also going back to Potemkin City Limits, where it's like, oh, he's fucking singing now. And there isn't a whole lot of singing on this song. There's a lot of like rapid fire on, delivering it. appropriately for what the song calls for. But yeah, I kind of love how fast it is delivering.
I know,
this. Yeah.
And I wanted you on this one because I wanted you to like talk to me about why you love this song so much. So give it to me.
Yeah. Okay. So I think delivering this set of lyrics in the most straightforward and like, I don't know, sermon-esque way with the song is clearly a hardcore punk song that I think in truth, this is a version of the band that is, less concerned with the virtuosic performances and the months and months of demoing songs, all this stuff. They're capable of all that stuff. And that's what makes them stand out from, the class they came out of or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But Letters to a Young Anus, they really rely more on their government issue or SNFU leanings. And here's a song, here's a song we wrote. Here are the lyrics, take it or leave it. They really just putting it all out there. That being said, the song clearly is leaps and bounds ahead of anything SNFU or GI ever wrote, especially musicianship wise. It's almost like Propaganda can't help but be the greatest version of whatever it is they've decided they're doing on whatever song.
I think you're going to get it. I think we might get some comments on your hot take there on this being better than SNFU and GI.
Okay. No, musicianship wise.
Okay.
Look, I feel like I have friends who are Canadian who do not listen to SNFU. And it's almost like
that's a sin. That is like,
I feel sorry for them. Yeah,
I do too.
But yeah, and it is funny, and it is also funny where it's like, that this group of skids, self-proclaimed skids, this is not me trying to be mean, but this group of skids from Winnipeg got into, or Saskatoon or whatever, got into SNFU and government issue and all this stuff. But then when you listen to it, it's like, how did you get from Cannibal Cafe all the way to Duplicate Kizikaro? It's like, how did that translate to this? And I mean, the quick answer is Voivod, but there's a whole lot more that figures into it. And so it's funny to hear in a song like Letters to a Young Anus, where Chris is just spitting lyrics at you rather than singing them or arranging them even, which isn't to say, obviously they put work into the song. Obviously it was carefully calculated, but it does sound very, direct and forced rather than carefully calculated and sung.
Yeah, very, very organic too. Like I feel like this one is like very natural sounding. And if you think about the way that Chris's delivery for vocals has been for a bunch of years now, there's not a lot of stuff like this elsewhere in the discography. So even though I feel like this one is like, it harkens back to some other like punk bands and stuff like that do stuff like this more often. This is kind of a unique one within Propaganda. So other bands overdo it and Propaganda dramatically underdoes it, except for on this one song. So that's actually okay. You're bringing me around here. This is useful for me.
Yes.
Yeah. This is good. So like, I'm like, oh wow, they actually really underdo this strategy. Whereas other bands, like this is all you get. Ooh, yeah. Okay. I'm good with this. I like this. Okay. So, should we talk about the lyrics a little bit?
Yeah, let's go.
Okay. So let's kick off this discussion with Chris saying himself what the tune is about to him. So the band played Sydney, Australia on May 18th, 2019 at the Metro Theatre. And he addressed the topic of the song before playing it. So let's hear Chris's own words first before you and I go in and do our thing.
Countries in the world. Where's the next one? Hey, if you could write a letter to your young self, what would you say to your young self? Would you say, shut the fuck up? Because that's what I would say to my young self. And so we wrote a song about it. This is called Letters to a Young Anus.
Okay, so that was Chris's explanation on stage. Hopefully everybody could hear that clearly enough in my YouTube ripping, file there that I edited in. So we got this opening line here. Be careful how much you reveal. I've got one piece of advice for you, kid. Keep your mouth shut. Put a fucking lid upon your dissenting views. And I said it that way on purpose because that's how he sings it in the song, which I think is a really sweet little phrasing that he did. So, Josh, tell me about your interpretation of this first opening line here.
Okay. So anyone that has listened to The Last Believer, a podcast about Good Riddance, Santa Cruz California hardcore punk band, knows that I'm not shy about letting my own lived experiences cloud or influence how I perceive the song in question. In this case, I feel like I have been told by people, sometimes not much older or more experienced than me, that maybe whatever I think and how I am saying whatever it is I'm saying will not be received in whatever company I happen to be in at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, most of the time the person telling me this is doing so because they want to see me excel at whatever. And it comes from a place of care, but also acknowledges that whatever I'm talking about, usually something I'm opposed to, will not be welcomed by the people that I'm expressing it to in the way that I am. It's more for me a way of saying that you should know your audience before trying to make an argument. Putting a lid upon your dissenting views in the way that I read the stanza is a warning, but not from someone trying to convince you to not say anything, but instead it's from someone that, is kind of on your side, like a comrade, rather than someone that you're opposed to. Someone that maybe holds some of these same views, but has seen what happens when these views are expressed in certain circumstances. And in trying to save the speaker the speaker of these views any trouble, they're sort of like letting you know, like, maybe you just want to chill a little bit. So personal story that I think of, and I thought of the first time I ever heard this song was in the 10th grade. I was asked to not show up for homeroom because I refused to stand for the national anthem. Obviously, clearly a very, very important thing when I was 14, 15 years old. Anyway, I still feel weird about it, like, although I'm rarely in a national anthem friendly space these days, but the teacher in my homeroom found this wildly offensive. And so I was sent to the principal's office, and the principal tried to level with me. And he was like, is it really that bad? And it's only 1 minute of your day, stuff like that. And I was stubborn because I was a young ass and inspired by the words and actions of people like Chris Hanna. So to like the compromise that we landed on is that I would just show up for school 5 minutes late every day and go straight to first period, skip homeroom. So I think of that principle when I hear this song, because he was basically telling me that you can hold on to these views and you can stand by them in whatever way you want, but it's not necessarily going to benefit you or like have the effect that you're hoping for. That's my take on these first two lines anyway.
Yeah, and I whenever you're talking about sharing your views and knowing your audience and whom you're with, I think about the fact that like sometimes like I'm with my family and like a topic will come up and like there will be like a gap in the conversation. And my strategy now is to say, I have nothing good to say about this topic. So if you want me to comment on it, I will, or we can move on and I can just retain how I feel about this for myself. Yeah. So I give everybody a warning, like I have nothing good to say on this. So I tell them that everything that's going to come out of my mouth after that moment, should they choose to hear it, is going to be a bleak assessment of that topic in question. And sometimes I let it rip and sometimes I don't. And I kind of like it.
Is it really worth it? Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And, thinking about that principle, I'm wondering, I can't, as a teacher myself, I kind of have this little like begrudging like respect for that principal's decision, because, it sends a message to the other kids in the room too, that you stopped coming. But then if those students in the class were to talk to you in the hallway, be like, hey, why aren't you in homeroom anymore? You could share why. And then maybe they decide to do the same thing. Like there's a chance that like by you not being punished, like explicitly punished, because you just got more free time. You know what I mean? And all of like 6 minutes. But like, let's be honest, in 10th grade, 6 minutes, a lot of stuff can happen in 6 minutes in 10th grade. And they didn't they didn't chastise you in front of other people. So there's like this kind of like, I have this kind of like respect for the way that principal handled that, because he's like, okay, fine, you can have the views. You can skip this section of your day that you do not want to be a part of. And then other students would be free to ask you questions about why you are no longer in homeroom. And they didn't tell you not to talk about it, from what I can tell, right?
Well, I mean, no, but also anyone, I was just a weirdo who didn't stand for the national anthem. No one wanted to talk to me about it anyway.
Yeah.
Yes. In theory, yes.
In theory. So I that's how I'm choosing to see it, because like stuff like that happens in school all the time. And like Keith and I have talked about the pledge on this podcast before, but like what I would do is I would stand right under the flag at the very front of the room facing the wall. So all of my students were behind me. So I had no idea who was and who was not doing their thing. I made it a private thing for them to do with my back to them, where I would just stand under the flag in the very front of the room and they would be behind me. So I had no idea. So it was like a totally private decision that I kind of like, that's just kind of the way that I handled it in that moment. But I kind of like the way your principal handled it. I think that's kind of cool of them.
I think he realized how much of an asshole I was. And also the same sort of thing. It's like, this isn't worth the fight. Just show up 5 minutes later. Like, it doesn't matter.
Teaching is about survival just as much as being a people person.
Yeah, no kidding.
Okay, so for this, for me, to anyone interested in hearing Chris elaborate on what he said on stage in that clip, Chris has been really clear in his Patreon episodes about his reflections upon past versions of himself. Like when he used to rant and rave on stage for years and years about like things like go vegan or go fuck yourself, kind of stuff like that, like extremely confrontational stuff where he would just, chastise the audience. I'm thinking about that Gilman Street show from 95 where he essentially yelled at people for 20 minutes of a 35-minute set.
America rules.
America rules. Yeah. And then where he's like, I'm going to come down there. If I see somebody moshing, I'm going to come down there and like, defecate. So good, real good stuff. And it's just comedy gold. And I listen to that set probably once every 3 months or so, and I love it every time. But so anyway, he has said in this new stage of his life, a hockey dad, stuff like that. He looks back on how loud he used to be and how he just now he just like shakes his head on it because he rethinks the strategies that he was trying to enact, but how off-putting and unpersuasive it likely was for a lot of people. Sure, he likely persuaded many people, myself included, yourself included. But I think about all the people that he would have done that to in the 90s and how they would have been like, man, that guy's just like not nice. But it cracks me up when he's like, little Chrissy couldn't keep his little pie hole shut because he feels like if he hadn't been so visible in his rage about certain topics, he could have approached activism in different ways and been a part of more effective methods of subverting the animal industrial complex through the underground animal liberation movement. He's like, I used to run my mouth so much that I would be suspect number one in things like, subverting an actual animal industrial facility. But if he would have just not talked about it so much publicly, he could have been a part of actually being a part of those groups who would go to those facilities to dismantle what was happening inside of them. So I like and I appreciate his growth and his reflection on that young anus part of his life. And I get it. Like I see his running his mouth as being very effective because he turned God knows how many people on to the ideas the band espouses that they wouldn't have otherwise been exposed to, me included, through these extremely popular records that hit me at a perfect time and place. So while Chris cringes at running his own mouth back in the day, I'm definitely grateful that he did. And I also appreciate his change of heart on the subject. So that said, I'm saying this while recording everything that will live online forever. So, it's like everything that we're saying here is like now stored forever. So if I wouldn't be saying these things, I would be doing what the song is essentially encouraging me to do, which is, act to make the world a better place instead of just sitting here in my house at my desk doing this. So we have this freedom of speech, but wow, maybe we should recognize a bit more in our lives when not to use it quite as much. And I just volunteered at my kids' elementary school for the upcoming school year. So I'm doing the thing where I'm trying to be a part of the local to make the extreme hyper local a little better. So I'm trying to incrementally build those things into my life. So anyway, I like this opening line a whole lot. Do you have any thoughts on or reactions in response to anything that I just rambled on about for ages?
No, that all of that makes sense. And yeah, I think we're on the same page here about how just the idea that the way in which you promote ideas that you believe in just knowing how well it'll be received or how far to push. I think that's an important thing. And I think, obviously in retrospect, I feel like you probably have the same thing. All the traveling you've done in different classes that you've worked in and taught and whatnot. There's probably different ways that you would have dealt with things if it was presented to you now. And I know, like I'm saying, I'm embarrassed as hell about how I was when I was 15. I got sent to the principal's office for not standing for the national anthem. But at the time it was important. And that's why there's songs like Letters to a Young Anus.
Yeah. I mean, and that's like a personal connection to you where it's like, wow, I really love this song because I'm thinking about my own self. And whenever a song can connect, when you connect with the song on a lived level, I mean, that only enhances one's enjoyment and internalization of that song. So let's go to the next line. Don't roll your eyes when they face the flag. We already talked about that. Or stitch the goddamn thing on their carry-on bag. Hold your tongue though your reflexes to gag. There's nothing you can do. Tell me about your thoughts on this line.
Okay, Greg, I think this song. This is the other thing. This song is very funny as a Canadian. I'll talk a little more about the whole flag on the backpack thing in a bit, but the idea that someone wrote that into a song is super funny because it's just like an ongoing thing. Anyway, first of all, though, I think that the respect dedicated to pieces of cloth with symbols on them is stupid. And as a species, we should really move beyond it. Flags don't actually tell you anything about the country they represent. How could they? There's people, especially so the Canadian flag, which I'm sure everyone can picture in their brain. There's people that'll tell you about how the red sides of the Canadian flag represent the oceans on either side, and there's a maple leaf in the middle, and I refuse to actually research this. I'm pretty sure that a maple leaf is not the most populous tree in the country. Anyway, supposedly that will represent the country. I'm sure that there's a joke about how there's snow and that's what the white is. But anyway, how is a red leaf supposed to tell you anything about the country, or that we have more fresh water and other natural resources than almost anywhere else, or that the country is built on a legacy of genocide and brutality that is far too common on this quadrant of the globe? So to place respect on a piece of cloth does warrant that eye roll at the very least. Also, I'm going to go out of my way here. This is me going off my notes. This applies to punk logos as well. The amount of old men, because I feel like that's what we are now, they get mad about teens wearing Black Flag or Nirvana or Misfit t-shirts. It's just a symbol, and it doesn't, like, maybe it means something, but also how much weight are you putting into a symbol, and you're just really opening yourself up to being made fun of. Anyhow, this may or may not be one of the dissenting views that makes this song ring so true for me. Okay, the whole sewing a Canadian flag onto your luggage thing.
I'm dying for this. I'm ready for it.
So far as I know, it's totally true. And this is something that from the time you're like a kid, I grew up in not rural, but very small town, Ontario, Canada. This is something that, like, we're all told forever, is that Americans pretend to be Canadians when they're traveling. For reasons that have been explored many times on Unscripted Moments. Americans don't often have the best reputation as world travelers. And so, like, your whole life, you're told this: Americans will or would often sew a Canadian flag patch or a maple leaf onto their luggage, backpack, jackets. And the idea is that they will be treated better, more politely while traveling abroad. And I know that in my personal experience, when I visit, Australia or Mexico or Scotland, Morocco, whatever, I have found that when people figure out that I'm Canadian, their tune changes just a little bit, though. Like, I'm still, a white North American man, but the gagging at the idea of someone doing that, or being like, gag at the idea, instead of, trying to be more polite or working within American society to be more fair or reasonable or caring or any of that stuff. Like, do we have time for that? Or can I just sew a leaf on my backpack? That's where, and so I can understand how, it warrants the eye rolling and the gagging, I think, is the idea of just like, I could do real work, but instead just going to sew this thing. And to find out that it's true is really funny, because honestly, you tell your kids so much shit when they're little, and then when you actually grow up and see how the world works, it's like, wait, no one actually does that, right? The truth is, people actually do that. Yeah,
for sure. They definitely do. And, I first started traveling intensively in like 2004. And, I went on a backpacking trip to Europe from the US with my American friends. And none of us actually had Canadian patches on our backpacks, but we definitely talked about doing it before we went. Yeah. And what we did is we went with no patches of any kind. And, whenever I travel, I'm kind of a quiet person. I don't talk on trains. I don't talk on planes. I don't talk in airports. Like, I just kind of do my best to just kind of blend into the background as much as a 6'5" white guy can blend into the background. But I don't open my mouth. And like, whenever I had this distinct memory of being with my mom, and I hope this doesn't sound like I'm roasting my mom, but it's really true. I was with my mom on a train in the UK, and she was just talking. And I'm just like, and I'm just like, zip it. And so it was just this subtle difference that I noticed between myself and my mom when we were on a train going to Brighton one time. But this is definitely a phenomenon. I don't think that I know anybody who's ever lied about being Canadian with a sew on patch on their bag, but I have seen many Canadian patches on bags in airports in numerous countries around the world. So I have no idea if those people were actually Canadian or if they were Americans doing the faking it thing. But I love that you and I are on other sides of the border here. I mean, even though you're only like an hour and a half away. To talk about this phenomenon of putting these patches on luggage, like there's nothing you can do, which also resonates with the Purina Hall of Fame lyric. There's nothing we can do. Really resonates with me because of its truth. Like, you can't control a single thing anyone else does or says, like nothing. You can drive yourself insane with that. And trying to convince people of something is astoundingly difficult. And say you're at like a sports event and everyone is doing the national anthem and you're in your seat scoffing and laughing or whatever, you're not going to make any friends and you're not going to win any hearts and minds. You're just not. And if you are in an airport and you make fun of everybody with a flag on their bag, same thing. You're not convincing anyone of anything, and you lose the opportunity to have real conversations with people if, say, you get seated next to them on a plane. Like, it's hilarious that Chris, it's hilarious though that Chris talks about the luggage patches. Because I went, like I just said, to Europe in 2004 at the height of the Iraq War.
Right.
And that is when we were like, that was like the main reason why we were like,
I know you weren't wearing a Canadian flag patch or a maple leaf sewed on your jacket or anything. Were you wearing a Not My President t-shirt? Because I feel like 2004 was the height of the Not My President t-shirt.
I do not remember packing that, but here's what I did do. We were in, and I actually found pictures of this. Let me see if I can find it here. I'll show it to you in the video while I'm talking. But we were walking around Dublin. Oh, here it is.
Oh yeah, sure.
So here's Amazing. A poster. I'm
Giant
showing
Stop
Josh.
Bush sign. Yeah.
I'm showing Josh a poster of a picture that I took in 2004. We went to a protest at Parnell Square in Dublin on Friday, June 25th, 2004. There was a massive anti-Bush protest because that week Bush was trying to use Shannon Airport in Iraq as a refueling stop on the way to the Middle East during the Iraq War. And so my friends and I were like, yeah, let's go to that. So we all go and we're talking to people in the crowd and we're like, yeah, we're Americans on vacation. And they're like, you're protesting the war that your country is leading while you're on vacation? And we're like, yeah, obviously, because it's wrong and it's horrifying. And they were just like really cool about it. And they were like, they thought that it was really awesome that we were just like totally clear about where we were from. Because at that time, we had people in our group who were living in California, who were living in Chicago, who were living in Missouri. So we had people from all over the country in our little group. And we're like, yeah, we're Americans and we're here marching against the war with a bunch of Irish people in Dublin. And we were getting high fives and people were giving us beers. And it was just a really, really cool experience to like not lie about where we were from, not fake that we were Canadian, and just be totally in solidarity in the moment with the people who were having an airport in their country attempted to be used for a warring purpose. And that's just a massive memory that sticks out to me about that time and place that this song kind of reminds me of,
Yeah, for sure. That's That's a great experience to have. Imagine how different it would have been if you pretended you were Canadian. They would have given you 4 beers instead of 1.
I know. Darn it. I could have gotten way more drunk. So we have this next line. Don't laugh out loud when they vote NDP and then act all surprised when they serve industry. Now, Josh, the NDP needs to be spelled out by a Canadian, Josh. So everybody in the world is relying on you here.
Oh, great. Cool. No pressure.
I know, right? I'm just messing with you because obviously everybody who listens to this show is well aware that we are just normal people who have no qualifications or expertise to be talking about these things other than commentary on music in general, and things that interest us. So if you are curious about anything that related to the NDP, please continue to do your own research. And with that caveat said, Josh, tell us about the NDP and your experience as a Canadian.
I'm going to do my best to not misrepresent unscripted moments or myself. So yeah, I'm not by any means a political historian that studies the minutiae of Canadian political parties. So I'm doing a very top line explanation of the NDP, even though I know a lot of the listeners of this podcast are Canadian. I'm going to talk about the NDP as if no one has ever heard of it. I know some of you probably haven't. Please keep in mind the history of any political party or political system in Canada, for instance. There's a lot, and I am no Greg Soden, and I don't have the time to research every single detail about this thing. So I might miss some things, a lot of things, a lot. With that said, in 1958, the Canadian Labour Congress, and that's Labour with a U.
Oh, of course.
In Canada, we spell Labour with a U.
It's correct. It's the correct way. Objectively
it's silent
correct.
And it's silent and it's before the L. And so anyway, the Canadian Labour Congress and the Cooperative Commonwealth Federation joined forces to create a left-leaning political party that was in favor of supporting unions, and also was an attempt to engage Western Canada in Canadian political affairs. Too often in Canada, most of the population of Canada is centered sort of around Toronto, Ottawa, and Montreal, and therefore most of the political decisions are made by people in and around and specifically benefiting that region of the country. In 1961, the new political party was properly coalesced. Throughout the 70s, the NDP played a crucial role in federal politics in Canada. Though never fully in power, they worked with the Liberal Party mostly on several occasions to get in the way of Conservative Party policies and actions, all the while supporting unions and labor movements to a certain extent. In 1980, the first Prime Minister Trudeau, that's Justin's dad, our present Prime Minister's dad, was Prime Minister 40 years ago. Feel like there's a whole other podcast about how that happened, but he made an offer to the NDP to form an alliance, and the NDP party realized that wouldn't really benefit them, and so it never quite went through. They didn't accept the proposal. Towards the end of the 80s, the NDP was picking up steam nationally and had a total of 43 seats in Parliament, which is pretty high. It's still not enough to actually form a proper minority. Canadian government is too much. I'm not getting into it. Whatever. Anyway, towards the end of the 80s, the NDP really was picking up steam. However, the left vote was and is still often split, and Liberals almost always come out on top in that equation. So in the early 90s, there was a lot of dissent within the NDP, some squabbling that led to a real lack of confidence in the NDP in general. And then in the early and mid 2000s, it showed some promise. There was a guy named Jack Layton, and Jack Layton is pretty well loved Canadian, mostly. I don't know. He started working with the NDP, and everyone loved Jack Layton. He rode bikes and he drank beer and he played shinny. Shinny, by the way, is pickup hockey. For any of the non-Canadians listening, he was a charismatic leader for the party, and he introduced ideas like proportional representation to the party's platform. Unfortunately, the party has never really come out of third place in federal politics in Canada. Even in the most recent provincial and federal elections, the left vote, like I was saying, is definitely split, and nothing really changes that much as far as which parties call the shots. All this to say, with this line, what I think Chris is driving at is that for so many Canadians, both those educated and both those that don't have the time to or a capacity to really take in what the party's platform is about, the NDP seems like the party of hope for a better, more socially responsible future. They're the party most interested in working with immigrant rights, indigenous rights. They want to support healthcare and teachers and small businesses. And all that sounds great. But as I mentioned, the NDP has never really been in a position to fully enact any of what the party claims to be built on. So in the cases of the last 70 years, where the NDP does have access to power, and, they claim to use that power responsibly, it hasn't always gone according to plan. Nothing like overtly nefarious, but, there's been spending issues with various projects throughout the country. The example that sticks out in my head, in the mid 2000s, BC ferries is a huge thing. So British Columbia on the west coast of Canada, there are dozens, hundreds of islands, and they're all serviced by BC Ferries. It's an organization. It's such a crazy undertaking to imagine organizing BC Ferries, but the NDP was in power for a while on the West Coast, and they couldn't quite balance the books. And, it may have been looking for bailouts while they were supposedly in power. So this was like their chance to do a thing. But again, I'm not super well versed. So what I think Chris is saying is you can't act surprised when NDP does get voted for. Surprise, they end up in power and then they end up having to serve industry. We can't truly expect a party with what can be called lofty ideas to be able to fully commit to enact any of those programs that they claim to stand for. Everyone wants to make the world a better place, and a lot of Canada's GDP comes from companies that are directly opposed to a lot of the stuff that the NDP claims to be for. And with this line, I think Chris is warning the young Anus not to hold anyone to a standard that you think you can participate in, and believe that this system of government could ever be anything but controlled by industry. And of course, we know this because we're dorky punks who read this stuff and know that you can't trust the Canadian elected politicians at all. And so it's hard to not laugh at someone when they put all of their faith, all their energy into supporting this political party as though it will actually change anything.
Yeah.
Apologies to anyone who is an actual historian of Canadian politics. Hopefully I didn't get anything too far wrong.
Well, I'm actually really blown away. And so that was really helpful for me as well. And Damian Abraham was on our state lottery episode, and he did a really nice explanation too about some of the Canadian politics and his experiences with that. So I think that what you just said kind of connects to what Damian was talking about a lot on the state lottery episode. So those two comments sort of connect.
What?
Yeah.
How about this one? This just popped into my head 1,000 years ago when Fucked Up. I think it only showed up on their demo tape. I don't know if they ever properly recorded it, but they had a song called Municipal Prick where they maybe went after Jack Layton in the lyrics of
Interesting.
Municipal Prick. Again, this is 20 years ago now, so maybe I'm remembering that wrong, but yeah, that's funny. But yes, Damian, obviously, Damian has always been very more politically aware than I am, for sure.
Yeah, and I was thinking a lot about what you just said about I think in my experience, like the great example here in this country would be the Obama 2008 election, talking about healthcare policy for all people, in response to sort of like the Michael Moore, like Sicko documentary that came out like during mid-Bush presidency, where it talks about how basically every other industrialized country in the world has all this, like these access for, universal access to healthcare that doesn't make you go bankrupt like we have here in this country. And so Obama was kind of like running on that, and everybody was super psyched. Even like my punk rock liberal friends were like, everybody's going to get universal healthcare. And then of course, that doesn't happen. And there is a wonderful history of the healthcare movement written by Dr. Lindley, who is a professor at the University of Hawaii. He wrote a book called Single Payer Healthcare Reform. And it's all about the grassroots movement of trying to establish that. But like one of the first things Obama did is like he removed the single payer option from even being remotely considered. So like you run on this thing and you say it, and then you actually get in, and then you remove like the one thing that is like that everybody's really hanging their hats on. And then it's just one of those experiences, man, where it's like this massive buildup and then this crushing disappointment when everything fails to actually deliver. So that's kind of like my experience of connecting deeply to an issue and then having it fall flat on its face. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I think it's exactly that. And the idea of expecting anything to actually change based on what a party says they can do within a system and then what that system will actually allow them to do.
Yeah.
And putting too much faith in that is where you end up laughing at people who believe too hard in something.
Yeah. Oh man. Okay. Well, that was an excellent NDP overview that I honestly have no follow-up questions on, because that is not a system of government that I've ever participated in, really. And so I welcome comments at propagandipod@gmail.com or on the Instagram or Twitter too, especially if you have like thoughts and reflections and things you'd like to elaborate upon. Keep the conversation going. Tell us what you think about NDP. So let's go to the next line. This is one that's difficult for me. This is probably the most confusing line for me in the whole song. The water is poison despite how hard we mark our little X to rearrange the deck. I know you have some really grand ideas about this line, so I'm going to sit back and I'm going to let you explain this one to me as well.
All right. So I think the principal metaphor here is that the water is poison no matter what. The way the system is set up, there's no way we're going to win. It doesn't matter what party is running on what. It's poison no matter, first of all, the phrase how hard I'll talk about that in a bit, but just the idea that the system itself is poison. There's no fixing it. However, the line almost works like an Easter egg as well. It's a gross one. You don't really want to think about it. It's not like a fun Easter egg by any means, but as much as I just talked about the NDP and it's the best we can hope for in Canada, the overarching sentiment of this line, to me, something that comes up in any activist community in Canada is the disregard every Canadian government or party so far has had for Indigenous communities in the country. One of the lofty promises that the NDP mentions in a lot of their campaigns, this is going to sound like I'm very NDP. I swear I'm not. This is just things I know. But one of the things the NDP mentions is that they want to get clean drinking water to all Indigenous communities in Canada. And I want to say that right now, I personally don't think that clean water in a country as financially successful as Canada is a lofty idea. But to hear people in government talk about it, you would think that it was terraforming Mars. Anyway, having Chris sort of sneak that little reference into the song. There's between 61 and 89 different Indigenous communities in Canada that don't have safe drinking water for consumption. There's water advisories on so many different communities. Anyway, it's truly outstanding songwriting, I think. Well, lyric writing that Chris managed to fit this in after the line about not being able to fully trust the NDP. I think that's cool. It's just another little tangent to go on. I know in the US, there's a lot of talk about Flint in Michigan and how there hasn't been clean water there for more than a decade, something like that.
Long time.
Yeah. And the communities in question in Canada, and this isn't meant to like compare or whatever, but most of them have never actually had proper filtration and plumbing systems installed. So, like we can host the Olympics and the Pan Am Games and the World Cup, but we don't have the money to get clean water to people living in the country. And so the idea that there are citizens in this or any country with the means to solve this water problem or the water problem that we have in northern communities, and no one has actually done it, is a constant source of anger for a lot of Canadians. But unfortunately, not enough of us. And a lot of Canadians have no idea, have never interacted with anyone from an Indigenous community. And so they don't understand that the situation is as dire as it is.
Question: what about the X? What about that? What does that refer to in this line?
Oh my God. So when you're voting, you've got your circle and you write your little X in the middle of the circle. And if you go outside the circle, your vote is voided. And if you go whatever. So the main point, I think, of this lyric is being no matter how hard we mark our little X, there's no indication that the situation can actually improve. Not just the water situation, but all our situations will improve. And also, I think it's really weird to say how hard we mark our little X. Like it's a pencil and a piece of paper. I don't think the intensity with which you mark your X will really affect, like your vote doesn't count for more if you scribble it extra hard.
Dude, that's so funny. I never even really connected that the marking the X meant voting on a ballot. Like I never once thought that. So yay, new connection made in real time here.
Vote? Well, you're from Missouri, right?
Yeah.
So when you started voting, was it like a punch card situation or a screen that you touch a screen? Like
it's a bubble. So that's kind of like the thing that I wasn't connecting to, is that we fill in a circle oval bubble thingy.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And so I would feel like, so for me, the way that this line would have clicked with me is no matter how hard we mark our little bubble,
right.
You know what I mean? That's the way that I would have been like, oh, voting, but marking a little
good
X,
luck rhyming that.
I know exactly. So like this is way better, but like I never thought about it as marking an X into voting. So yay, Greg is stupid.
No. Wait, you've never voted in a Canadian election. There's no reason you would know that.
Yeah, no, I love that. Okay, so we have this line here, damned if we don't, damned if we do. I would just shut my mouth if I were you. So this is that, like, the connection to what Chris was saying when he's critiqued his own past behaviors. And so I'm wondering what you connect with on this particular line.
Well, yeah, I mean, when Victory Lap came out, Chris did an amazing 20-minute long interview on Q. I'm sure you've watched it. I'm sure a lot of listeners to the podcast have.
So
Anyone
many
that
times,
hasn't,
yeah.
Q is a show done by our national broadcaster, the CBC, and it's the most NPR style program I think the CBC does, where it's a long form interview, usually 20 minutes. A lot of times it ends up being almost like a career retrospective for whoever it is being interviewed. Anyway, during Chris's interview on it, he was talking about how he wished that as a younger man who maybe had a head start on seeing the inequities and injustices of the world, he wished that he had approached people that didn't know those things in a more polite fashion. And the idea that screaming in someone's face, we talked about this a lot on the episode already, but the idea in screaming in someone's face isn't going to achieve the desired effect. And with this line and truly the whole song, it seems like that's the point Chris is trying to make. You might know better, but the more you talk about how much you know better, the less likely you are to actually achieve anything substantial or change someone's mind in a meaningful way. Talking about the things that you have decided you are for or against is not always the best way to promote those ideas. And maybe if you just shut up and do some real world work, things can improve. Also, people don't like being told that they're wrong. And yelling at people and it'll negatively affect them actually wanting to hang out with you and do better and learn things. So the advice to just shut your mouth might end up leading to a more positive outcome.
Yeah.
Mostly I just wish I'd heard this song when I was like 18 or 20 or 25 or 28 or 35 or whenever, it's mostly, I'm embarrassed about every previous version of myself as well.
Yeah. Well, honestly though, that's actually a pretty healthy thing too. If you're embarrassed about your past self, that means you have assessed yourself and looked at yourself and chosen growth instead of ignoring your own problems. Cause I have plenty of problems, but every day I'm like, okay, I need to work on this. I need to work on that. So I'm like constantly being an assessment of oneself. It is like the biggest form of self-love that you can have, because if you tell yourself that you're capable of change and you look at the things that you do that you would like to do better in the future, that just means that you believe in yourself as an entity who is able to grow for your whole life instead of just in your adolescence. So that's what I love about that. And that in reference to that CBC Q with Tom Power interview that you mentioned, we had Mitch Pollack on the podcast, who
is one of the producers. Yeah.
He produced that segment. And so Mitch was on our Potemkin City Limits episode. So if you want to hear the story of how Chris came to be interviewed with the CBC for that Q with Tom Power interview, go back and listen to Mitch's segment on the Potemkin City Limits interview in episode 71. So Josh, we've got this next line here. Everything you say can and will be used against you, and dumbass, until you get that through your head with a masonry drill, it's all downhill for you. And I love how funny this line is. It's so hilarious. Like the young Chris, so loud, so talkative, potentially unhearing some things, would need a masonry drill to get something new into his brain to convince him of something that he didn't already believe. So Chris was clearly an insanely smart guy, very well read, very curious to learn all the stuff he did in such a short period of time to put together these basically timeless songs. So there was no critique here about Chris's intelligence and curiosity, but the fact that he realized that in some ways his life was much harder and he maybe accomplished less than he might have otherwise done so had he listened more, is a lesson I wish many people had the ability to learn. It's never too late to learn that lesson either. You can learn it when you're 57, I say that as someone talking on a podcast as well, right? So I understand there's an inherent irony here. The podcast is by far the time in my life when I speak the most, but I'm like allowing that critique to wash over me here in this present moment too. So tell me what you think about this line.
This line, obviously, it's a reading. It's taken from the reading of Miranda rights, and it's a whole new aspect when you consider that everything you ever wrote or posted is now on the internet for half of the world, and only half the world still to be able to see anytime they want. There are examples of people losing jobs or worse based on some of the stupid things that they said or did years ago or decades earlier on the internet, despite having done more positive since then.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that people should be allowed to grow. And, we, especially guys your age, my age, I'm a little north of 40, you're a little south of 40, but like there wasn't an internet before. We didn't know that this was going to be how things are for the rest of our lives. And every stupid joke that, someone our age or older or younger, whatever, put on the internet, that would be a thing that you could reference about someone's life forever. We didn't know that at the time. We were making some dumb joke based on a conversation we just had. Anyway, but the second half of the line about drilling it into your head, I think is a little ironic, and maybe purposely so, because the rest of this song is more or less telling you to be careful how and when you convey your views. And then he takes this authoritative, like diminuting stance by calling the listener a dum-dum that needs something drilled through their skull. It's like showing like a little glimpse at the approach that he's telling you not to take.
Yeah.
But he's in that also taking that approach.
Yeah. And you got to wonder too, because I think that Chris had like an intellectual awakening during his teenage years. Like he went from growing up in a military base to essentially becoming the very outspoken person on how to clean everything and less talk, more rock that we all know. So there's a period of time in there that we don't know anything about Chris's life really, from, like early childhood on a base to, singing about feminism on like less talk, more rock. So there's a change there in a period of time where it's very formative, very influential years. And I know that Chris's own kiddos are kind of creeping into those ages themselves. And I'm wondering how Chris is like having this like delicate dance of like watching his kids grow up in his house though, because I think his kids are, growing up vegan most likely. So there's a big difference here between how his kids are probably growing up, between how he grew up. So I'd imagine he thinks his kids are probably way ahead of where he was, but I'm wondering how he like tells stories about his younger self to his kids. I think about that a lot. Like, do you talk about this, like how you changed and how you grew? So that's kind of what I'm wondering. I want him to go on the Rad Dads podcast again and talk about it too, but we'll see if that ever happens. That's kind of where I am on this. And, but we've got this next line. It doesn't matter what you think. It doesn't matter how you feel. It don't matter that you can't sleep. Be careful how much you reveal. And, I think about this. I do agree that I've been listened to my whole entire life. So I feel like somebody who is my voice has always been heard. And I'm wondering kind of like where you start off on this particular section.
Yeah, I think this couplet, it's something guys like you and me, the white guys that have had everyone listen to us our whole lives, we need to hear this. I often think that I think of the Simpsons scene. Gotta bring the Simpsons into it somehow.
Might as well.
Homer says, I'm a white male, age 18 to 49. Everyone listens to my ideas, no matter how bad they are. And he pulls out a jar that says nuts and gum together at last and starts eating it, but also chewing it. And it's gross. Anyway, with this line in the song, the idea is that just because we have some kind of knowledge that we've gained either from research or from lived experience, that we don't need to be the ones telling everyone about how everything they've ever done or known is wrong. You never miss an opportunity to shut up. And so, we do podcasts and we're still, as white guys, the most likely boxes ticked when everyone is trying to do market research or whatever. And while the context of the song I'm sure this isn't a call for representation so much as a call for reflection before shooting off your stupid mouth.
Yeah. I've been given so many opportunities in my life that I didn't deserve on many occasions. Something that I noticed after I became a teacher is how I kept being offered opportunities for professional advancement when I was very early in my career. And at one point, it was even alluded by one of my bosses that I was like on a principal trajectory for like a building principal at a high school. And I was like, I've been a teacher for 2 years. Like, I don't know what I'm doing at all. And you're sitting here talking about how I'm like on this path. And it just, those kinds of examples have happened to me a bunch of times where I was considered for opportunities, offered opportunities, despite never giving off a single whiff of being interested in those paths or excelling in a skill that warranted being given those opportunities over other people. And I think about that a lot because it's happened a bunch of times. And I'm not really that good at what I do for a living. And yet I keep getting good opportunities to do them. And I bumble my way through them. And I'm sure somebody else could do them 10 times better than me. But my life has been.
I heard you don't even make kids stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I mean, you gotta.
That's what I heard.
Cutting corners where you can, man. Yeah. Work is hard. You got to cut corners where you can, and my life has been incredibly privileged forever in ways that I can scarcely even fathom. I'm still processing this at 38. And a reason I've had such a good life has nothing to do with my talents or skills and hugely to do with my starting point. And that said, I like this line a lot because it speaks to some of the hopelessness a lot of us may be feeling right now, wondering like, why don't our leaders ever do things we want them to do? The churn of society is sort of like a slap in the face here. It doesn't matter is the core line running through this section. You don't matter. Your little opinions don't matter. Nobody is listening to you, and your critiques of this system and the things that keep you up at night are just that, things that keep you up at night. We're going to keep doing what it is that we do, and you'll be happy with your scraps. Take it or leave it. And if you're not happy with it, tough. Scraps are what you get. So like that to me is kind of like the lesson coming through this. So even though I have this like really privileged position in society, there's still like this like stratosphere of power that's like 10 steps above me, where it's like that is like otherworldly levels of power. And even though I'm so lucky to be where I am and to have the opportunities that I do, there's like this like stratospheric level that I could even scarcely comprehend.
Yeah, of course. Yes. And remembering that when you're trying to make your arguments, we've talked about how important it is to figure out your audience on this episode already.
Yeah. Let's bring this in for an extremely cheerful and happy ending.
Hopeful.
Ixnay the I told you so's. Suppress your overwhelming urge to gloat. You can save all that shit for your suicide note. Trouble wording your last laugh? I'll lend you my final draft. Be careful how much you reveal. Bleak stuff. Does anyone do darkness better than Chris Hanna? I don't know. Like, not that I can think of off the top of my head. Like, this sort of connects to the very cheeky and open to interpretation, gonna get a load of what I got planned line that closes out Zoocosis later on the record. This also reminds me of Chris's longtime Twitter bio of I told you so, which was the Propaganda official Twitter bio for like a year. And for years and years, Chris has been pointing out ways that this system cannot be reformed. And the past 3 years have continued to get exponentially worse. And The End of the World is just the beginning is a book that I was looking at recently about the collapse of globalization and mass retirements and like what comes next in our future. And I'm like, whoo, this is dark stuff. So tell me what your thoughts are on this suicide note conclusion that we have here.
Extremely grim.
Yeah.
Yeah. After, a life of watching the world destroy itself by ignoring every warning sign, yeah, man, it could drive you to suicide ideation. And I know that we've been joking. I was talking about The Simpsons a second ago, but it is something that we need to seriously think about. These warning signs can be, watching lawmakers refuse to acknowledge issues of reproductive rights, environmental issues, indigenous people's rights. Somehow the still legal sale of firearms. I don't know. It gets intense and overwhelming, and none of us are in a position to actually change any of that. And that could crush you into feeling so much despair that, yeah, you don't want to be around anymore, and that idea put forth, at the same time as someone not wanting to gloat because they foresaw how awful everything was getting. It's a weird juxtaposition to have the idea that so well what the system does, but the system forces you into being a victim almost of yourself and the hopelessness that you kind of have forced upon you.
Mm-hmm.
Deeply grim.
Yeah. And, you think about I think back on the 90s now, and I'm like, wow, that was a paradise. You know what I mean? But it was a paradise for me. It was not a paradise for untold millions of people. But for me, I mean, I look back and I was like, man, life was amazing in the 90s. And like Chris is saying how horrible everything is on Let's Talk More Rock. And I'm just like, I don't get it. Everything's awesome. Life is good. The sun's shining, and you know what I mean? And so I could imagine a lot of people scoffing during like these quote unquote like glory years of like pre-social media. But I don't know, man, this is some dark stuff. But I found a few YouTube comments, just a couple. There's not that many amazing ones on this song. Somebody wrote, lyrics are so damn poignant. Each record really makes my rebellious heart sing along. And these guys are the most solid, consistent, and badass band in history. I've been listening to them for 20 years, and they've never once phoned it in. So, Josh, I do have to say that having this conversation with you has made me rethink this song a little bit, made me like it more. Every time I have one of these conversations about these songs, I wind up liking the song in new ways. And this conversation has been hugely helpful because you've helped me see this is almost like a local song. Like it's helping me be like, this is like something that is very local to the songwriter, local to the band. And it helps me kind of connect to some of the things that Chris has said in the past about how he wants to make his neighborhood a better place. And so they're like zooming in on like some local stuff here, which I really enjoy. So you've elevated my appreciation of the song. But one of my takeaways is that I struggle with hopelessness. I think maybe I listen to too much propaganda a lot of the time, and I get a little down in the dumps, and I get a little fatalistic and a catastrophist, but I feel like it's warranted a lot of times because I'm otherwise a pretty cheerful and outgoing and social person. But I was recently on vacation with my family, and when something would come up related to the state of the world, like I said earlier, I'd just be like, I don't have anything good to say about this. So when someone asks me to like elaborate, like I've gone on rants about where I see the future of the world going, but I'm also just me. And so I'm thinking about what I can do. And so perhaps I got through to someone when I speak up on things like that, like when I go on these little rants, but like I didn't make the family vacation better by saying some of that stuff. So it's like a cost benefit weighing of options of when to speak up and when to not. And just like, can you like catch yourself in the moment when you're about to go down a really dark path and potentially ruin an entirely positive situation? Like in that moment, like would I have been like the cause that a really nice day with me and my 10 cousins and mom and dad and siblings, would I have been the cause that whole day was ruined? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's really hard stuff, wanting the world to be what it's not and wanting civilization to be what it's not, and engaging in that conversation in purposeful and productive ways instead of just ranting to eyes that glaze over the second you launch into your first main point. So that's what this has me thinking about, is some of these experiences of like, can I catch myself in the future and prevent myself from ruining otherwise very positive experiences? Because, positive experiences in this world, in this day and age, they're fewer and far between. And so like, am I the cause of making more bad as opposed to more good? That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah. I honestly, my takeaway from this song is that I honestly love that Chris has gone out of his way in song form to say that even though he believes what he believes, he feels like he was a bit of an asshole about it for a long time. and he sees the errors that he's made. And that perspective is something that I can definitely identify with, and maybe identify with a little too often, because I was and will continue to be such a young anus.
And thinking back on Chris's Patreon when he was like, little Chris, he couldn't keep his pie hole shut. Like, yeah. I love moments like that. When he says stuff like that on that podcast, I absolutely crack up. So yeah, I'm going to rate it now. And I want everybody to just, go gentle on me on this one. This is my least favorite song on Victory Lap. I still love it. Don't get me wrong, but like I've listened to it a whole bunch of times and I just feel the least strongly about this one. I like it for sure, but this one is one I wouldn't be bothered if I didn't see it live, but I would like to see it live now that we've talked about it, but I don't wait for it to come up in a set list, and I don't wait for it to come on when I listen to Propaganda records. Like, there's a difference between waiting for supporting cast to come on and waiting for Letters to a Young Anus to come on. It's just a different sport to me. And it has an excellent message that is universal to all people wishing they could tell their younger selves something. But we all know the younger self wouldn't listen anyway, most likely, because old people are squares. So I like that the song is super relatable, but seeing as how this is my least favorite song on the record, I cringe. These words are coming out of my mouth. Like I'm like grossing myself out right now, just so you know. This is not easy to say. And seeing as how I like most songs, like most Propaganda songs more than this one, I'm going to give this one a 2 for me, just me personally. I'm not saying that anybody out there thinks this is a 2. It's obviously a great song because it's Propaganda, but this one isn't really my thing as far as Propaganda goes, but it's obviously better than a bunch of stuff from Quality and Quantity and several songs from How to Clean Everything. But for later era Propaganda one, this one is the one that works like near the bottom for me. So tell me what you think now. I'm super sorry, everybody out there who hates my 2.
Well, honestly, Greg, I would say I think this is maybe my favorite song on Victory Lap.
Yes. I'm super happy to hear you say that, because like now we've got 2 ends of the spectrum here, and that actually couldn't be more perfect. Tell me why.
The thing. Okay. So just for some context, just because it's my favorite doesn't mean I think it's the best.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Sure.
There's objectively, we mentioned Cop Just Out of Frame. I think Zucosis is fucking insane. Yeah. But I like this song a lot. So because no one knows me particularly well, they've been listening to you and Keith rate these songs for 2.5 years, a while.
Insanity. Yeah.
But no one knows me particularly well around here. So for context, the songs that I would call a 5: Supporting Cast, Without Love, Mata Camoris, Resisting Tyrannical Government, Rattan Cane, Speculative Fiction, like those are 5s for me as far as Propaganda is concerned. So I'll give Letters to a Young Anus a hard 4.
Okay.
It's a little simpler than a lot of what the band can do, both lyrically and musically, but that simplicity makes for an impact that outstrips a lot of the rest of the band's catalog as far as, just pure intensity. Occasionally, there are Propaganda songs that ask a lot of the listener, and for the most part, I'm down. But when a song like Letters to a Young Anus comes on and it hits you that immediately and that impactfully, that counts for me as much as, having to go figure out what happened at Ruby Ridge or whatever and research what they're talking about. So I'm giving Letters to a Young Anus a hard 4.
Love it. Well, Josh Lindley, this has been a real delight. Thank you for joining me to co-host this episode of Unscripted Moments, a podcast about Propaganda, and putting in so much work and effort into your preparation. I know I ask a lot of you for this one. And so I just want you to know how much I appreciate it. And do you want to maybe tell listeners out there where they can find you if they kind of want to, be friends and hit you up and follow you or whatever? Sure. Tell everybody where you're at.
So if you enjoyed the possibly inaccurate retelling of Canadian political history, you will probably want to listen to the Last Believer podcast. We did 65 episodes. There may be more coming out. But in theory, we finished it a few months ago. And so that's me and my friend Dan talking about the works of Good Riddance. I feel a very not as much musically, but definitely politically and spiritually connected band to Propagandhi.
Definitely.
Obviously the other side of the world, but so we did 65 episodes of that. It's called Last Believer, a podcast about good riddance. And if you are interested in bartending and liquor, and I know, Greg, we were joking about doing a bonus episode about how vegan any liquor can be. It came up on the mutual friend episode, and I was like, dude, you got to call me for this stuff. The answer is no such thing as vegan liquor. Anyway, that's the top line. So if you want to message me about that, you can do that at Bartender Atlas. I'm also on Instagram at josh.f.lindley. It's private. I will probably accept you, especially if you send me a message saying I heard you on Unscripted Moments. Anyway, that's how you can find me. Greg, thanks so much again. I know that Keith has some very physically big shoes to fill as far as doing the podcast. Hopefully Keith hears this and approves. I know you and I get along. I've never met Keith. I feel like I really need to impress him more than I need to impress you. So thanks again for having me on. It was fun for me to go through and go this deep into a band and a song that I love the shit out of.
Well, thank you, everybody out there, for listening to our episode on Letters to a Young Anus. If you want to email, you can hit me up at propagandipod@gmail.com. You can find us on social media at propagandipod on Instagram and Twitter. Thank you so much for listening. See you next time.